Dear brothers and sisters, this week Jesus invites us to journey with Him along the path of humility. One of the salient aspects of Luke is the importance of table fellowship, where Jesus presents important teachings in the process of sharing a meal. The table fellowship has greater emphasis on the lives of those present rather than the menu served. Today, Jesus invites us to join Him at this table of sharing and conversion. Why does Jesus speak about humility during this meal? Jesus found some scribes and Pharisees vying with each other for prominent places at the table to be close to the host. They considered themselves as first ones and the chosen people. When Jesus teaches us of choosing the last place, it is not merely an instruction on good manners. He spoke of the essential truth that before God we are nothing, and among our brethren we are the least. We live in a world that teaches us to put ourselves before others, to reach the top at any cost, to compete. We are told to consider ourselves better than the other. But Jesus proposes a different attitude of taking a backseat, humbling ourselves. We are told being humble is a sign of weakness, but Jesus tells that it is the strong who can really be humble. He did this in His life and tells us, "Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart." The first reading taken from Sirach invites us to live our life with humility. For us as Christians, humility is the lowliness of mind that is able to accept God's greatness and our littleness before Him. This virtue is the foundation of our spiritual edifice. It helps us, as we see in the letter of St. James chapter 4 verse 10, to humble ourselves before the Lord so that He can exalt us. Philippians chapter 2 verse 3 tells us that humility aids to regard others as better than ourselves and prevents us from acting out of selfishness or conceit. It assists us to move out to others in service and be unassuming. St. Paul tells us in Romans chapter 12 verse 3, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourselves more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned." But why is humility needed for us? The second reading provides a perspective to answer this question. All our lives' efforts are oriented towards heavenly Jerusalem to worship the Lord. Only the humble of heart could genuinely worship the Lord. The letter to the Hebrews reminds us that everyone is considered firstborn by the virtue of our sharing in the sonship of Jesus, the firstborn. And that calls for us to emulate Jesus, who humbled Himself even to the point of dying on the cross for our sake. Jesus, by His life, reminds us that our life of humility must impel us to own responsibility for our brethren in need. Humility is not merely being at the service of others who can repay us, but rather serving those in need but can't repay. We as people responsible, those entrusted to us and accountable to God, be it preachers, teachers, parents or superiors, like to speak of humility to our wards quite often, but our life seems to be speaking contrary to our words. The Holy Family, where boy Jesus was schooled, serves as a model for all of us. Mary and Joseph not only taught humility, but they as humble people were all open to God's intervention in their lives. They were humble enough to listen to their son. The son learned humility from them, and it was a mutual process. How can we live this experience in our families and communities? I would like to suggest a few possibilities that would aid us in this direction. First, surrender our families and ourselves to God. This should be our prayer as well as our lifestyle. Secondly, listening to others and speak less of ourselves. Third, accept the little inconveniences in our family and community with joy, especially by bearing with one another. Fourthly, let us not stand as judges over the faults of others. And fifthly, let us choose to help those who can't help themselves, though it might cost us our time and energy. Jesus did this in his life, and he continues to do this at every Eucharist to all who are blind, lame, sick, crippled, orphaned, both who are physically as well as spiritually poor. We, the poor, weak and the sinful, are served by the Lord himself in his total self-giving. As we partake in the Eucharist with Jesus himself as our meal and journey with him along this week, let us respond to God who calls us to live a life of humility. Let this be our mantra for this week. Jesus, meek and humble of heart, make my heart like unto yours. May Mother Mary, who in her humility served the Lord and others, help us in our efforts to be people of humble service. Amen.